Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's going to be okay. I promise. The sky is not falling for the Green Bay Packers and their fandom, though you'd never know it looking online. Daire joining me from Packer Report. Daire, this is the first time I've probably ever done a video inspired by a single tweet, which was yours, in which you mentioned the fact that the Packers had been living in paradise essentially for 14 days and then came crashing back down to earth yesterday against the Browns, no doubt about it. But man, there are some serious overreactions going on online today.
Yeah, there's a lot of dumb losses that happen every week in the NFL, and the Packers just happen to get caught out by one of them. And this isn't anything new, The Packers lose. Have
Right?
lost dumb games before and won Super Bowls in years that they've lost dumb games. But yeah, look, the other guys get paid to play too. The other guys get paid very handsomely to go out and win games. So, you don't show up and that's what happens. But yeah, sky is not falling, as you said.
Well, what is crazy to me is obviously the discourse almost always starts with the quarterback, right? And we'll get to the coach in a little bit because I know that has been another kind of favorite talking point for fans with their pitchforks out after that game. But you look at Jordan Love, and of course, the highlight or low light, if you will, from that game is the interception. There's no two ways about it. It's a horrible throw, horrible decision, something Jordan's going to have to learn from, no doubt about it. But outside of that play, it's wild to me to see how people are painting this as some terrible performance by the quarterback when can we talk about the fact that he had absolutely no time in the pocket, given the fact that his offensive line was a sieve through, I want to say, the majority of that football game? To me, it was like Jordan did what he could given the circumstances.
Yeah, and this is a good defense. If you ask anyone I feel I feel like we're really coping at the minute. We're like, this is a really good defense, but no,
But
it
you're not
really
lying.
yeah.
It's like
If
you're
you
not telling
ask
tales.
if you ask anyone who covers Cleveland full time, they're always talking up, especially at home, how good their defense is. They held the Bengals to 17 at home in week one, and that they are a good team. Obviously, they're built around Miles Garrett now. As I'm sure you do too, have questions around how the Packers game planned for Miles Garrett.
Yes.
Maybe they had a little bit of brain fog watching how good Micah Parsons was for their defense and said, you know what, everything needs to be centered around stopping the pass rusher. But it turns out that everybody else in the Browns defense just got they got a full serving of
They
Jordan
kept
Love because
winning. Yes.
yeah, they won all over the field. So yeah, obviously on a pretty terrible offensive line performance for the Packers. That doesn't help when your highest paid lineman goes down with a re-injured oblique. Again, we can ask questions about midweek whether that was the right decision to start him. But in terms of the execution on game day, I think everyone's took it a step a little bit too far.
And what's kind of wild to me is that there are certainly legitimate criticisms. I mentioned the coaching and kind of the operation, and you lose Zach Tom on the first play of the game, and you do have to adjust, and you've got guys maybe playing that you weren't expecting, etc. They still have to produce. They still have to perform, right? There's no doubt about that. But there are things within your control as a coach that, you know, I think LaFleur can do a better job of regarding not even just game planning, because that's clearly they have more information than we'll ever have at their fingertips, right? Leading up to the game, but even in the game, as far as tendencies and things like that. But one thing that is blindingly obvious, and you mentioned the fact that the Cleveland was playing at home and their defense has been even better than it normally is at home. Man, Matt LaFleur did his quarterback no favors with the kind of lack of tempo when it came to getting the call in and then getting in and out of the huddle. They kept coming up to the line of scrimmage with around like 10, 12 seconds on the play clock. Hard to diagnose and get yourself into anything else as a quarterback or as an offense when you're up against the clock repeatedly. We saw them have to use a number of different timeouts. To me, that was kind of the first major issue as far as you're looking at the game and what the coaching staff could have maybe done to mitigate some of this. First game away from home, it certainly seemed to bite them.
Yeah, and you mentioned the tardiness coming up to the line. Is that what Americans say? Tardiness,
That
lateness.
works. That'll do.
Yeah, no, the just in general, like there was a play that I think they ended up getting this one off, but there was like a 3 seconds on the game clock, and it was like third and short, and the Packers were running it up the middle all day of the week, and they still had like Dontavion Wicks do like a 3 yard motion to the left before the play, and I'm like, I get that this offense is built off motion, as so many are in the NFL, but like we have to hurry it up, and especially those offenses like Lafleur's that have so much pre-snap motion going on and diagnosing from Jordan Love going on. You just have to get up to the line quicker. But I do think that's going to be a point of emphasis going forward, and it's a lot better finding that out against Cleveland in week 3, even better than it is finding it out against Detroit in week 1.
I totally agree. And, no sooner do you put that game to bed than you turn around and, yeah, your next game is on the road in prime time in a house that's, been favorable for the Packers as far as down in Dallas, but still a road environment. You got to try and shut that crowd up early, or else, that's going to it's going to become a long night real quick. But looking back at this game against the Browns, the other kind of narrative out there is special teams and the problems and the issues and the penalties and the block kick. Obviously, I can't put it all on Bisaccia. Certainly, players have to perform. It's not like they're sitting there all week and going, okay, on this kick return, we want you both to hold and get penalties, and then they can choose who they call it on. But man, it does feel like this is a recurring theme, right? And I don't want to completely gloss over the fact that there have been positives on special teams. Obviously, the block kick is horrible, but the Packers are in position to win that game and get that kick off because of a 40-yard return. That's special teams. But of course, that doesn't get remembered because of the block kick.
Yeah, and the special teams debacle is always a funny one to me because nobody is a special teams expert in the world of the NFL media. And like
Truly.
we don't know, like we really don't know how much time Versace is allowed to get because they're not going to come out and say, oh yeah, well unfortunately Rich only had 30 minutes of practice time to work with his guys this week because they were working on offense and defense. So
Mm-hmm.
no one's going to come out and bury one another on that side of it. And as you say, yeah, like there's only so much coaching to be done on special teams. It's not like if I was to ask you like how do you describe the Chiefs offense and how does it differ to the Lions offense, you could explain that to me. You can say the same about a defense.
Right.
You can't tell me what's the difference in one team's special teams and another because it's a pretty much a universal thing, no matter how long your players have been in the league, if they're young rookies, if they've been playing journeymen all over. Like special teams to special teams, and it just comes down to player execution as much as coaches. There's a reason that these special teams coordinators aren't household names. The
Yeah.
Rich Patricia, ironically, is one of the only guys that is considered a household name in the NFL. But yeah, I guess a level of it has to come down to him. But I thought you had a funny thing I didn't actually notice at the time, but the trajectory on McManus's kick was kind of
It's
interesting.
bad. It's low. And that's the thing. I was kind of, going on about that on Twitter this morning. I mean, Bisaccia doesn't tell him kick it low, you
Yeah,
know, that's on the player, and look, you can be the greatest special. Darren Rizzi in Denver is considered the best of the best in the business, and his special teams unit literally cost them the game against the Colts.
yeah.
It's like this is not a Rich Bisaccia specific thing. Now that said, does seem to be a bit of a theme. It does seem to pop up repeatedly, and it's not even just because and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You look at the kind of connection with LaFleur and Bisaccia, right? The idea that he gave him the promotion a couple years ago as far as making him assistant head coach, right? So he clearly values his input across the team and his ability to see things and coach things, etc. But now I'm just after yesterday's game, I'm thinking back to that Bears game at the end of the season last year, and it's like this can't become a theme where you've got Bisaccia and LaFleur on the sideline conferring and talking about stuff and then messing up the end of these games where they have the game in hand. Because that's what makes yesterday so frustrating. And to your point earlier, it's great that it happens in week 3, right? You don't want it happening in like playoff push time or in the playoffs itself. I get it's frustrating, but man, that can't become a theme where you have these games completely by the throat and then you just give them away. That to me, if there's any concern, it's the way LaFleur and Bisaccia seem to have kind of been part of this same narrative now a couple of times.
Yeah, I think back to the 2021 team, that was a really, really good Packers team all around. Like that was maybe their best team since 2014, and like we all know how that went. But the one thing that was consistently letting that 2021 team down all year was special teams, and you were kind of thinking, like as the season went
It's
on, is
gonna
this going to
cost
be the one
them.
thing that
Yeah.
completely burns them? And now you've got a Packers team that, like, I mean, it's extremely early, but if you were to say it now that at the end of the season, I'll be saying that's the best team since 2021 or 2014, I'd be saying, yeah, sure, probably could be. Like, has all the potential to be just as great as those teams were, what were they, like 13-3 teams?
Right.
But the idea that they just have this one lingering tiny issue, and it has burned teams in the past. I always remember the 2009 Chargers with the number one offense and
Oh
number one
wow.
defense in the NFL missed
Good
the
pull.
playoffs because
Good
of
pull.
their special teams. But that's just one of the, like, that's obviously a very, very extreme case of what we're dealing with. But it is one of those things that always lingers, and it just doesn't seem to be fixed. Do you have any faith that the Packers ever turn around their special teams? Like, any faith?
I do actually. That's the crazy part. Is like because some of it, I mean, not every instance, of course, but some of it is simply, okay, guys got to execute, and I do think given time on task, you mentioned there's a lot of young players, veterans in and out. Now every team deals with it, but that is kind of to your point why it is almost systemic throughout the league, right? I do think it's about getting these young guys time on task and getting guys into roles that they can repeat and do week after week after week. Hopefully, you get down the stretch here and a lot of this is ironed out. I know like Bo Melton coming back helps and things like that.
Yeah.
There's some player specific stuff as well. But as far as like this is going to cost them long term, it is like you said, so early yet. Um, and hopefully, these are lessons that can be learned and kind of built upon as the season goes forward. Because here's the thing, man, there hasn't been a championship run from any Green Bay Packers team, both in my memory and before I was alive, where they didn't have almost inexplicable losses or horrible games along the way. And as you said in your tweet, it's great for my perspective as well. It's great that they got it out of the way now rather than, okay, they're riding along, maybe they're 7-8-0, and then they suffer some horrible loss and things kind of spiral from there. I'm fine with it happening now, but a big part of it, of course, is how do they respond and what do they look like Sunday night in Dallas?
That's You've hit the nail on the head, and I mean, it's good that they can kind of get this boot up their ass, and we can see what this team looks like pissed off, because they haven't played pissed off all year, they haven't
I'm down
needed
with
to.
that. Hell yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like, and I you would like to imagine that a team with the competitors that they have and the likes of Michael Parsons, like Parsons has always been this kind of, like, he's just a dog, and if you get that going, you get him annoyed, you get this team with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. I think they could only be even better.
Totally agree. Dara, always appreciate the time, man. Make sure you're checking out his work at packerreport.com. We'll have a link in the description of this video for you to do so. Dara, talk to you soon, man.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.